Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. My name is Dennis, a co-organizer of this wonderful group. Our presenter today is Nancy Harhut, co-founder and chief creative officer of HBT Marketing. Nancy is also author of the book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. To make your marketing messages persuade people to act, you need to trigger decision defaults, and you want easy, effective ways to do that. In this session, Nancy will help us discover the 9 decision-making shortcuts all humans have and how to use them to create messages that get results. Nancy, thanks for joining us today, and take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Dennis. It's an honor to be here. It's great to meet some new people, see a couple of familiar faces. So awesome. Really happy to be here. And going to do the old share the screen thing and get ourselves ready. Okay. So I thought what I could do is go through the presentation and then maybe open things up for any questions that people might have at the end. So
just as impact.
All right, so we sound good. And so to get started, I want to say that you've been lied to. But it's not just you. I've been lied to too. We have all, as marketers, been lied to, because for years, we have been told that if we simply get the right message to the right person at the right time, we'll get the right results. But that's not entirely true, because if we stop there, we're stopping short. What we really need to do is we need to get the right message to the right person at the right time and in the right way. And when I say in the right way, what I mean is in a brain-friendly way. The late, great Daniel Kahneman puts it this way. Oh, here we go. He says, the brain doesn't like logical, rational, conscious thinking and will take any shortcut it can. So let's just pause and let that sink in for a moment. The brain, the very thing we associate with, I don't know, logical, rational, conscious thinking, turns out brain doesn't like that. The brain is actually a little lazy, and it likes to take the easy way out. And as a result, humans over the ages have developed certain decision-making shortcuts. So what's a decision-making shortcut? It is an automatic, instinctive, reflexive response. Humans have developed these over the millennia as a way to conserve mental energy, because we couldn't possibly weigh every bit of information before making a decision, or we'd never get around to making any. So instead, we've developed these hardwired behaviors, and what happens is we cruise along through life on autopilot, and when we encounter a certain situation, we just default to these hardwired behaviors, giving them little, if any, thought. So you can think of these decision-making shortcuts as hardwired evolutionary impulses that at one point helped keep us alive, and today help get us through the day. So what do I mean by that? Well, imagine a couple of our ancient ancestors. They're out for a stroll. They come upon a saber-toothed tiger. One of them looks at the tiger and says, wow, look at that, the fur. It looks so warm. It looks so inviting. Ooh, but the teeth look, boom, he's gone. Tiger has him for lunch, right? Now his buddy looks at the tiger, spins around on his heel, runs back to the cave. He's the one who lives to see another day. He's the one who passes his genes from generation to generation, and his are the genes that we've inherited today. Now, of course, today they're not protecting us from saber-toothed tigers. They're basically just helping us get through the day, exerting as little mental energy as possible. So what does this mean to us as marketers? Well, what it means is we need to factor these decision-making shortcuts into our strategies and into our creative, into our executions, because that's the way that we're going to more likely connect with our audience. It's going to increase the chances that people notice our message, that they understand our message, that they remember it, and that they respond to it. We want to use what science has proven about human behavior in order to influence it. And what I'd like to do today is I'd like to share with you 3 overarching ways that we can do that, 3 overarching ways that we can apply behavioral science to our marketing. And under each of the 3 overarching ways, I'll also share some very specific, practical, tactical examples of how this can be done. So let's get started. Overarching principle number 1 is the idea that it's not about how we think, but how we feel. It's not about how your customers and prospects think, but how they feel. And again, going back to our ancient ancestors, it was their feelings that drove their actions. Their feelings informed their actions. Maybe they were feeling hungry or cold or frightened or possessive of their few belongings, but what they were feeling informed how they behaved. And it turns out that all these years later, behavioral scientists have found that it's emotions that drive our decisions. We make decisions for emotional reasons, and then we later justify those decisions with rational reasons. In fact, there's a researcher named Antonio Damasio, and he conducted some research among humans who had sustained injury to the parts of their brain that control emotion. And what he found was those people were virtually incapable of making a decision. Even a decision as simple as, what would you like for lunch today? Right? People would go back and forth and back and forth and around and around. They couldn't land, they couldn't decide. Damasio proved that we need to access the emotional parts of our brain in order to make decisions. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, that makes sense for, well, certain products and services, maybe vacations or wedding venues or fashion, right? Things that have a little emotion, attached to them. But what about things that are, I don't know, more practical or boring? Or what about B2B? But I assure you that you want to have both emotional and rational components to your sales and marketing messages, regardless of what you're selling. So let's look at a few examples. Here we have something for a company called Cognos. They are an IBM company. They make business intelligence software. So basically their product kind of takes the data that's locked in disparate databases and it bubbles it up to the top so that the user gets a full 360 view. So that's a pretty good benefit, right? And they certainly could have led with that. That was, it was a nice thing to have. You have a problem, now here's a solution. But instead, they took a much more emotional, more empathetic approach. They put themselves in the shoes of their target. Now imagine you're a top level executive, you're being paid to make the big decisions, but you know that you're making decisions without access to all of the information. And that's the kind of thing that can start to weigh on you. It's the kind of thing that can make you second guess yourself. So they rolled out this campaign that said things like the antacid for a diet of tough decisions, or the delete button for the voice in your head. And then, of course, they go on to explain, what it is about the product that you would be interested in, what it is about the product that would be helpful to you. But they start with that more emotional, more empathetic approach. And they got a 13% increase in purchase intent. And the reason I believe that happened is because when the target market saw this, it resonated with them. And they thought, wow, if these people over at Cognos understand my world that well, maybe they actually have a product or a service that would be beneficial to me. Or here we have something for Slack. And they say what it feels like to sit in 25% fewer meetings. So they're talking about what it feels like. They're not talking about the increased efficiency, the increased productivity. They're talking about how it feels not to be stuck in meetings. And they even show, unicorns and rainbows. Well, here we have something for United Rentals, and they rent construction equipment. Pretty practical, maybe even a little boring, kind of standard. But look at what they say. They say it's 4 p.m. Your excavator just broke down. Concrete needs to be poured tomorrow. And then they have those 3 magic words that I've circled in red: consider it done. And I believe they take this approach because they know that for their target market, these people have either experienced a situation like this or they know someone who has. And they know immediately the world of pain that this opens up, right? The excavator's down, concrete's not going to get poured, we're going to be off schedule, that's going to start to ripple, the foreman's going to be upset, the boss is going to be upset, the client's going to be upset. It's going to be one giant headache. And then you see consider it done and you just have this feeling of relief. It's like, oh my gosh, someone's got my back. If this happens, there's an alternative for me. There's a solution. So remember, use emotion to connect with your customers and prospects. That said, not all emotion is created equally, or not all emotions are created equally. Behavioral scientists have found that people are really afraid to lose. People are really afraid to lose. They don't like it. In fact, behavioral scientists talk about something called loss aversion. And what they found is people are actually twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. But do you see the problem there? What do we do in marketing? We double down on the gains, right? We're all about the gains, the advantages, the benefits, all the wonderful things that will happen if you just do what I'm asking you to do. If you just, click on the button or pick up the phone or send back the card, right? It's all about the benefits and advantages that you'll get if you become my customer. And the truth of the matter is we know the benefits work, and I'm not suggesting we should walk away from them, but a little well-placed loss aversion can go a long way. For example, if we were in Vegas, or actually in California, I think you guys have casinos, maybe, I'm not sure. But anyway, if we were in a casino and we're playing the slot machines, if we won $100, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, that would feel like a 5. But if we lost that same 100, it would feel like a negative 10, right? It registers twice as powerfully. And as a result, we're that much more motivated to avoid losses. So how do we use this in our marketing? As I said, a little well-placed loss aversion can go a long way. We're not going to walk away from benefits, but a little well-placed loss aversion. For example, here we have ProFlowers, and they say, order Kathy's gift today or pay more. Prices increase tomorrow. Now, normally, our inclination would be to say, buy it today and save, right? We know that people like to save, and they do. But what they like even better than saving is they like knowing that they didn't pay more than the next person did for the same thing, right? So instead of saying save, you're saying, look, if you don't buy today, you're going to pay more. Well, here we have something from a conference. This is a B2B conference, and they say, we have a fear of commitment too. That's why our refund policy lets you cancel your tickets for a full refund through the end of March. No questions asked. So what are they allowing you to do here? They are allowing you to preserve your options. Normally, it's a very binary decision, right? You either purchase a ticket and hope like heck that your calendar is clear when the actual conference time arrives, or you delay purchasing that ticket. And then when it gets closer and you look at your calendar and you're like, oh yeah, I think I can actually make it. Then you go to buy a ticket and you maybe get disappointed. You find out that the conference is sold out. Here they're saying, you know what, you can have both. You're not going to lose either of your options. Buy your ticket. If it turns out you can't go, you get your money back. So you're preserving your options. You lose nothing. Or here we've got a headline. They say 4 common MarTech mistakes and how to avoid them. And you can just imagine somebody sitting on your shoulder saying, oh, no, that's way too negative. Make it positive. Don't talk about 4 common MarTech mistakes. Talk about, 4 popular MarTech moves and how to make them, right? Put a positive spin on it. And the truth of the matter is 4, popular MarTech moves and how to make them, that would be good information. We'd want to know that. But if you had to choose between the two, what we really want to know is how to avoid the mistakes, right? We don't want to make the mistakes or the missteps that someone else has. So it's all about avoiding mistakes. So remember, avoiding pain beats achieving gain. And as we're talking about the fact that our customers and prospects are it's all about their emotions, right? It's not about how they think, but how they feel. I want to share one more bit of emotion with you. And that's this idea that if something is ours, we feel it's more valuable. If something is ours, we feel it's more valuable. There's a term known as endowment effect, the endowment effect. And it was coined by Richard Thaler, who a few years ago won the Nobel Prize. And what Thaler found was if there's something that we want to acquire, something that we desire, well, obviously we value it. That's why we want to acquire it. But once it becomes ours, we place even greater value on it. We think it's worth even more once it becomes ours. It's why if I were going to sell my house, I'd call up a real estate agent, say, hey, I want to put my house on the market. And they'd say, that's great, Nancy. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to run the comps. We're going to find out what comparable houses, houses your size, your condition in your neighborhood. We're going to find out what they're currently selling for. And based on that data, we'll know what to put your house on the market for. And I'd say, great, sounds good. Call me back as soon as you've run the comps. A little while later, the real estate agent would call back and say, all right, Nancy, ran the comps. We're going to put your house on the market for X. And I would say, X? Oh, no. That's too low. It's got to be higher. It's got to be more. Why? Because it's my house. It's my house, and I value it more than the data tells me the market would be willing to pay. So how do we use the endowment effect in our marketing? Well, here's a company called Lot 18, and they sell wine by mail. And they want me to buy a bottle of wine by 11:59 tomorrow. And I'll be very honest with you, not that heavy of a lift, right? I happen to like wine. But I love the approach they took because this is what they did. They said, you have $15 of unused credit in your account that will expire tomorrow at 11:59. Now that's very different than saying, buy a bottle by 11:59 and we'll take $15 off. Buy a bottle by 11:59 and we'll give you a $15 discount. Buy a bottle by 11:59 and we'll send you a $15 rebate. Now, mathematically, these two things are the same, whether I apply my $15 credit or whether they give me a $15 discount. Mathematically, they're the same, but psychologically, they are worlds apart. Because this credit was mine, it was already in my account, but it was going to expire at 11:59 tomorrow. It was more valuable to me. It was worth more. I didn't want to lose it. And that's the lovely thing about the endowment effect. It works really nicely with the idea of loss aversion. Or here's another example. This is from Publishers Clearinghouse, and you probably know how they work, but basically they randomly assign you a number, and then on the appointed day of the drawing, they randomly choose a number, and if the number they choose happens to match the one you've been assigned, well, then you've just won $2,500 a week for life. But look at how they make it seem way less random. They really make it seem like this is your number, and they want you to feel that they want you to feel that ownership. They send you an email with the title to your number, and they say, please accept your title or surrender it. We must have your decision regarding prize number ownership. And then later in the email, you can't see it because I've cut it off, but they say, if you don't accept your title, and this happens to be the number that's chosen, you'll have to forfeit your winnings. So with language like forfeit, like ownership, like surrender, they're really making you feel that this is your number and yours alone. They're making you feel that ownership, that endowment effect. Well, here we have something from Hootsuite. Not that long ago, they decided to uh, discontinue their free account. And so they said, if you delete your account, you will lose access to Hootsuite and your scheduled content will be permanently deleted. And then they go on to tell you that accounts are not recoverable. And they also mention that the email associated with the account cannot be used for a future Hootsuite account. Because basically they want you to upgrade and pay for the service. But they're really using the endowment effect there, right? You're going to lose access to it. Your scheduled content will be permanently deleted, not recoverable. And you're feeling that ownership. You're feeling the endowment effect. You're like, I don't want that to happen. I better upgrade. So remember, people are possessive. They do not want to lose what they have. So to recap, it's not about how your customers and prospects think, but how they feel. Emotion drives their decisions, even in B2B. So we want both emotional and rational planks in our sales arguments, in our marketing arguments. We want to have a balanced argument. We want to keep in mind that loss aversion is particularly powerful. People are twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as we are to achieve the pleasure of gain. So, even something as simple as, instead of saying take advantage of, we can say don't miss out on. Simple changes in language can trigger that idea of loss aversion. And then the idea of the endowment effect. People value things more when they think of those things as their own. So you either want to remind people of what they have, maybe the equity they've built up in their house, maybe the long-term relationship they've built with a particular vendor, or you want to give them something like the $15 credit I had in my wine account, or you want to use such vivid language that people create this mental picture of what it's like to use your product, to use your service, to be your customer. And once they've created that mental picture, they don't want to give it up, right? It feels like it's theirs. So again, it works nicely with loss aversion. All right, the second of our three overarching behavioral science principles is our choices are less rational and more reactional. Our choices are less rational and more reactional. Again, going back to our ancient ancestors, they were not rewarded for sitting around and processing things and thinking them through and weighing the pros and cons and doing the cost benefit analysis. No, they were rewarded for acting now and thinking later, right? It was all about fight or flight, friend or foe, eat or be eaten, make the decision quickly. When you're safely back in the cave, you can process the whole thing, but it was all about acting, making the decision fast, not about thinking. And all these years later, even though we like to think that we make well thought out, well considered decisions, the truth of the matter is very often there are other factors at play that we're reacting to. There are other factors at play that we may not even be aware of, and they are the things that are triggering our reactions, that are triggering our decisions. We'll tell you we made the decision for one reason, but there was something underlying that decision that really prompted us. For example, having an option makes people more likely to choose. And you may say to me, well, I don't know, Nancy, I mean, you're going to offer me an apple. I either want the apple or I don't want the apple, right? If you say, here's an apple or an orange, why would that all of a sudden make me want the apple more? But it can. And the reason it can has to do with something called autonomy bias. What behavioral scientists have found is humans have this deep-seated desire to exert some kind of control over themselves and their environment. We like agency, right? We don't like to be forced into doing things. And behavioral scientists actually observed this when they happened to be in New York. This wasn't an experiment. They just happened to be out on the streets of New York and they noticed something and they're like, oh my gosh, this is such a good example of autonomy bias. So, excuse me. A few years ago in New York, a number of years ago in New York, I'm not exactly sure when, they decided to revamp their crosswalk system. So typically you'd approach a crosswalk and the walk, do not walk sign would be there. There'd be a button on the pole. You know how this works, right? You press the button and the walk sign appears. And they decided they were going to automate that. So just every so many minutes, the walk sign would just automatically appear. No need to press a button. So they start removing the buttons. And they find out it's getting very expensive to remove these buttons. So they got about halfway through and they say, forget it. We're going to disable the rest of the buttons, leave them where they are, just disable them. So now you're in a situation where depending on the particular crosswalk you approach in New York, there's either a pole with a button or a pole without a button. And what the behavioral scientists observed was when people came up to a crosswalk and there was a pole with a button, they would press the button and they would be more likely to wait for the walk signal to appear. Now, in fairness, it wasn't pressing the button that made the walk signal appear, but they didn't know that. They thought that they had control, right? They felt that they had some kind of control over the situation, and it impacted their behavior. The behavioral scientists noticed that when people would come to a crosswalk and there was no button to push, they were much more likely to, look left, look right. And if they thought they could kind of cut in between the cars and get safely across the street, they'd run for it, even if it said don't walk. So how do we use autonomy bias in our marketing? Well, take a look at this subject line. They say, do this now, create an income that puts you in charge. In those last 4 words, puts you in charge, that's marketing gold, because it just speaks to that human desire we have to be in control, to make the decisions, to be calling the shots. In fact, they even go on to say, this means you'll have options when it comes to travel, adventure, even living abroad. But if you have options, by definition, that means you're the one making the decisions. As a matter of fact, researchers at Tulane University found that if you offer somebody 2 options as opposed to just one, you can nearly quadruple the likelihood that they'll make a buying decision in the moment. And here's the reason why. If you put one thing down in front of someone, there's no context. There's nothing to compare it to. And so people think, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll do some research. Maybe I'll talk to my colleagues. Maybe I'll talk to my spouse. And then what happens? Life intervenes. They just don't get around to doing the research, right? They don't get around to Googling or talking to their colleagues or their spouse, and the buying opportunity passes. But when you put 2 things down in front of someone, suddenly the question goes from, do I or do I not want this one thing, to which of these 2 do I want? It almost becomes a foregone conclusion. They're going to choose one of them. It's just a question of one. Why? Because we're making it easy. We're putting context in place. We're giving them something to compare it to. The human brain likes to take the easy way out. And it's very easy to make a choice if you have 2 things to compare against each other. It's much harder when there's only one thing and you have to go and do your own research. So making it easy increases the likelihood people will make the decision. And as we're talking about autonomy bias, there's one more tactic I want to share with you. It's called the BYAF technique. BYAF stands for, but you are free. And what behavioral scientists have found is you can tell someone what you want them to do. You can ask them to do it. But then if you follow the request with words like, but you are free to choose, or the choice is yours, or it's up to you, or it's your call, you can on average double the likelihood that people do what you want them to do, because you're just reminding them, you're making it really salient, really top of mind, that they're the ones making the decision. They're not being forced into it. So remember, choices make people feel in charge, and humans have a very deep-seated desire to feel like we're in charge. So we're talking about the fact that people are less rational, way more reactional, and it turns out that expectations influence people's behavior. Expectations influence people's behavior. And you may say, I don't know, Nancy, maybe my expectations influence the behavior of my children or my grandchildren. But I'm marketing to fully formed adults. And these are adults who have their own wants and needs and likes and preferences and desires. And what I hope they do, I don't know how much influence that has, but you might be wrong. Behavioral scientists talk about something called labeling. And what they found is when you label somebody as part of a group, they automatically start to behave like the other members in that group, even if they hadn't previously considered themselves to be a member of that group. So researchers in Chicago ran this experiment. It was shortly before an upcoming election. And they went out and they talked to people and they asked them about the candidates that were running for office and the questions that were on the ballot. And they got some demographic and psychographic information. And then they took all of this information and they pushed it off to the side and they randomly, that's the key word, randomly, arbitrarily put people into one group or another. And then they went to one group and they said, you guys are the more politically active. And then they watched to see what would happen. And a few days later, when it was election day, 15% more of those people showed up to vote. Why? Because what would a politically active person do? They would vote on election day, right? Now, it wasn't 100% of them, but it was 15%. And if you could, by just altering some of your marketing copy, get a 15% bump, wouldn't that be a great thing, right? So how can we use this in marketing? Well, here's something from the IAPP. This is the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And they were running some advanced curriculum, some advanced classes, professional development classes. And they said that they were for career-minded privacy professionals like you. Now, prior to getting the email, You might have said that you worked in the privacy industry. You might have even described yourself as a privacy professional, but you probably wouldn't have said, oh, I'm a career-minded privacy professional. But when you get the email and you read that, suddenly you think, I am pretty serious about my job. I've done pretty well. I plan on, continuing in this career. I think I am a career-minded privacy professional. And what would a career-minded privacy professional do? They take advantage of the advanced certification classes, right? Or here's a screen grab from a website for architectural and design firm, and they say, our clients are discerning individuals that are seeking like-minded architects and interior designers. And as the prospective customer, right, you see that and you're like, oh yeah, that is so me. I am definitely a discerning individual. And as a result, well, this must be the company for me. I can't go just anywhere. Now, in addition to labeling your prospective customers, you can also get them to self-label. So imagine you're talking to salespeople, and maybe you have a new, I don't know, CRM system. You're talking to salespeople, and so you say that to those salespeople, there are two types of salespeople. Well, what's going to happen? The salespeople in your audience, they're gonna lean in, right? They're gonna be thinking, oh, really? Tell me more. What are the two types of salespeople? Because I want to know what kind I am, right? The human brain loves to categorize. We love to put things into groups or categories, and we're more interested in ourselves than in anyone else. So it's like, all right, I'm a salesperson. There's two types. Tell me what kind. So then you go on to explain that, well, there's one type of salesperson, one group, and these salespeople are relentless. They will hammer away and hammer away and hammer away. They will not take no for an answer. And they say there's a second type of salesperson. And in this group, the salespeople are much more consultative. They're much more concerned with the lifetime value of the customer. They're much more concerned with customer satisfaction, with net promoter score. And as you hear these two descriptions as a salesperson, you think to yourself, oh, that first group didn't sound so great. No, I'm definitely in that second group. That's where I belong. And then as the marketer, you simply explain that your product, your CRM system, was really developed specifically for the people in that second group. So remember, you want to use labels that trigger the desired behavior. Use labels that are consistent with the behavior you're asking your target market to do. And finally, we're talking about the people that we're talking about the fact that people are less rational, way more reactional. Turns out that people respond to the source of the information. People respond to the source of the information. And you may say, well, fact is a fact is a fact. What difference does it make where the source is? But it can actually make a big difference. Behavioral scientists talk about something called the authority principle. And what they found is humans have been taught ever since they were young to recognize and respect authority. So by the time we're adults, it's ingrained in us. And so when an authority says something, when a subject matter expert says something, we usually believe it. And when an authority or a subject matter expert suggests we do something, we often do. As a matter of fact, this was proven, a very interesting story. I believe it was out on the West Coast. There was a ATM machine. I think it was at Wells Fargo. And a couple of guys, crooks really, they dressed up as bank guards, and they positioned themselves outside of the ATM, and they put a sign on the ATM that said, the ATM is broken. Please give your deposits. Please give your money to the guards. And then they just stood there. People walked up, they read the sign, and most of them didn't even say a word. They just handed their money over to the crooks. These guys made off with thousands of dollars. Now, if I had been standing there in my blue jeans and a hoodie and put up a sign that said, oh, the ATM is broken, but give your money to Nancy, she'll get it to the bank, nobody would be giving me any money, right? Because I didn't look like an authority. I didn't. It makes it sound like I tried this. I have not tried this. I wouldn't have looked like an authority. But these guys who had on bank guard gear, they looked like authorities, and people just assumed, right? So we have a tendency, it's a very common decision-making shortcut to just defer to authority. So how do we use it in our marketing? Well, Citrix has a section at the bottom of their website that says, see what the experts are saying. So on their website, they say wonderful things about themselves, as they should. It's their website. But they also know that people take what a marketer says with a grain of salt. So they then say, well, here's what the experts are saying. And they quote Forrester and Gartner. And right away, someone on that website might think, oh, awesome. These guys are subject matter experts. They're paid for their expertise. They're expected to know the market. And if they say that Citrix is good, well, they must be good. Or here we have LL Bean, and they say that their ski parkas are trusted and tested by the U.S. ski team. And if you happen to be in the market for a ski parka, well, then the U.S. ski team qualifies as an authority, as an expert. And you're like, well, if they're good enough for them, good enough for me. I can stop my searching and I can go back to doing something else. Now, if you want to establish yourself as an authority or as an expert, you can take a page out of the Conversion Sciences book. They offer a 110-point e-commerce checklist. And there are a lot of conversion optimization companies out there, but you come upon this one, you think, wow, they wrote a 110-point e-commerce checklist. They must know their stuff. They must be authorities. They must be experts. All things being equal, I'm going to go with them, right? They seem to know their stuff. I'm probably not going to make a mistake if I go with them. So remember, people defer to experts. So to recap, our choices are less rational and more reactional. There's autonomy bias, this deep-seated desire we have to feel some kind of agency, some kind of control. So give people choices. Remember to remind them that they're in charge. Don't make them feel like they're being forced into something. When people feel forced into something, they react against it. Very often they'll do the exact opposite of what you're asking them to do if they feel they're being pushed, if they feel they're being forced. So we want to remind people that the choice is theirs. Labeling. People will automatically start to behave like the other members of a group that they've been told they're part of, even if they hadn't originally considered themselves to be part of that group. Now, of course, there are limitations to this. If you're, I don't know, if you're marketing grass-fed steaks, and you happen to be writing to a dyed-in-the-wool vegetarian and you say, you are a discerning carnivore, they're not suddenly going to be buying steaks and eating meat. No, they're going to find that very, well, distasteful, I guess, right? But if it's a neutral or at, even better, aspirational label that you're giving them, if it's something that they would like to think of themselves as being, or they'd like other people to think of themselves, or they'd like other people to think that they're that way, that can be really good, right? And it can really motivate people. You tell them that they're part of a group of discerning customers. You tell them that you're part of the, of our best customers, right? It gets people to behave the way those other people do. And then there's the idea of the authority principle. We're taught to recognize and respect authority. We've been taught that since we were young. By the time we're adults, it becomes a very common decision-making shortcut. It saves us time and energy to just defer to experts. So now we're up to our third and final overarching behavioral science principle, and it's the idea that we rely on auditory cues. We rely on auditory cues. And again, going back to our ancient ancestors, well, they really had to pay attention to what they heard, because if there were maybe footsteps approaching at night, that could be danger. Or if they heard a rustle in the underbrush, maybe that was a small animal that they could kill and eat for dinner. Or if they heard a human voice call out, maybe that was a family member who was in trouble, or someone from their clan who made a wonderful discovery, right? They really had to pay attention to what they heard. All these years later, neuroscientists are still confirming the link between what we hear and how we behave. As a matter of fact, they're finding that certain sounds help humans heal faster, certain sounds help humans focus better, certain sounds even impact the way food tastes. Higher pitched sounds make certain foods taste sweeter. And good news for marketers, because behavioral scientists are also confirming the link between what we hear and how we respond to it. For example, people respond to reasons before they fully process them. People respond to reasons before they fully process them. Behavioral scientists have found that people are more likely to do what we ask them to do when we give them a reason why. And the great news about this is the reason why doesn't even have to be this ironclad bulletproof reason. It's almost more important to have a reason than maybe what the reason is. There's a researcher that came out of Harvard. Her name was Ellen Langer. Her name still is Ellen Langer, actually. I don't think she's passed. And anyway, she did this experiment that's become known as the famous photocopier study. And there were a bunch of people lined up to use a photocopier, and she sent someone to the head of the line, and she instructed them to say, excuse me, can I cut in front of you? And when they did, 60% of the time, they were allowed to cut. And that becomes our baseline. So then Langer repeats the experiment a second time, but this time she instructs them to say, excuse me, can I cut in front of you? Because I'm in a hurry to have some copies to make. Well, here that 60% number shoots up to 94%. And as I tell you this, you might say, well, they said they were in a hurry. Fair enough. But Langer repeats the experiment a third time. And this time she instructs someone to go to the head of the line and say, excuse me, can I cut in front of you because I have some copies to make? Well, here the 94% number drops to 93%. Statistically insignificant, still that same huge lift over the baseline 60. And what Langer did is she identified the word because as an automatic compliance trigger. When we see or hear it, we just start to nod yes. We just automatically start to comply before we've even processed whatever comes afterwards. We just assume that the words coming after the words because are going to be a good, legitimate reason. So how do we use this in our marketing? Well, here we've got another wine club. Told you I like wine. And they say, try us for $9 because my dad loves us. So right away, I'm grabbing my credit card. But if I stop and think about it, it's like, well, wait a minute. I don't know your dad. I don't know his taste in wine. So why is this such a good reason? But that's exactly my point. we don't stop to think about it. Very often we're cruising along on autopilot. I'm not saying always, but very often we're cruising along on autopilot and we're just reacting. You see that like, because, oh, there's a great reason. His dad says it's good. Let me give it a try. Or here we've got something from ADA Insurance. This is the American Dental Association. And they offer life and disability insurance to dentists. And they say that they have good premiums. But I have yet to find an insurance company that says that they have horrible premiums, right? Everybody says they've got good premiums. But here ADA says, our premiums are among the most competitive in the market. And then they go on to explain this is possible because of the economies of plan administration. And as you're reading along, you're like, oh, right, of course. Now, if you asked me to explain exactly what the economies of plan administration are, I'm not entirely sure I could. But I read this, I'm like, oh, right, of course. That's why I can believe them. It's the plan administration economies. The rates must be good. Now, in addition to providing the reason why by using the word because, another way to do it is to rely on something called input bias. And input bias is a very common decision-making shortcut. When people aren't sure of how to make a decision, of how to assess something, we're not sure, whether something is good or bad. What we do is we use the amount of time and effort that went into delivering that item, that product or service, as a proxy. If a lot of time or effort went into it, we think the quality must be good. So here, very simple example, Burger King's new French fries took 10 years to develop. And then it's after a decade of research on 2 continents, and we think, oh my gosh, these fries are going to be fabulous. Now, the truth of the matter is, maybe they are, maybe they're not. Maybe they were fabulous after 1 year of research. Maybe they need 1 more year of research before they become fabulous. There's no absolute, ironclad correlation, between those two, but we think there is, or I shouldn't say there's it's not causal, right? It's not that the 10 years absolutely make it that way, but we assume that it does. And the reason we assume that is, you know, over the years, this has become a very good rule of thumb for us to follow. Generally, it's true. If someone slaps something together, it's not going to be nearly as good as someone who took more time and more effort to put something together. So it's a rule of thumb that helps us. Generally, it's correct, but it's not always correct. But what it does is it provides a really good opportunity for us as marketers to use input bias. If we recognize that we're talking about a subject that our audience may not be deeply familiar with, and maybe they're not going to spend the time and effort to do the research, we can point out the time, the energy, the effort that went into creating our product or service, and that becomes an automatic proxy for its quality. So remember, use because or the reason why to trigger compliance. And sometimes your reason why is going to have to do with input bias. So we're talking about the fact that people rely on auditory cues, and it turns out that we're influenced by first mentions and familiarity. We're influenced by what we hear first, and we're also influenced by what we hear often. Behavioral scientists talk about something called anchoring. And what they found is the first piece of information that we encounter, and often it's a number, and in fact, very often it's a price, but the first piece of information we encounter becomes our reference point against which we evaluate every subsequent piece of information. So that first piece becomes our anchor or our reference point, and then every subsequent piece, we compare it to that very first one. That's like our touchstone. Behavioral scientists ran a really interesting experiment using anchoring. They went out and they asked people to estimate how old they thought Mahatma Gandhi was when he died. But they didn't just ask the question that way. They asked it one of 2 ways. Some people were asked, how old do you think Mahatma Gandhi was when he died? Do you think he was older or younger than 9? And other people were asked, how old do you think Mahatma Gandhi was when he died? Do you think he was older or younger than 140? So those 2 numbers, 9 and 140, in and of themselves weren't particularly helpful, because if you know anything about Mahatma Gandhi, you know he was older than 9 before he passed away. And if you know anything about the human lifespan, you know that no one's quite made it to 140 yet. But they did serve as anchors, and they did influence the answers, because people who were asked, how old do you think he was when he died, older or younger than 9, they estimated he was 50. People who were asked, how old do you think he was when he died, older or younger than 140, they estimated 67. So that's a 17-year spread. And the only difference was the anchor that was dropped into the question. People heard 9 and they went up from there. People heard 140 and they went down from there. So how can anchoring help us with our marketing? Well, if you sell a range of products or services, lead with your most expensive one. Right here we have Wix premium plans. They start at 39, they go all the way down to 13. Some people are going to go for the 39. Other people are going to go, oh, it's a little rich for me. But then the 22, the 17, the 13, they all look so much more palatable, right? They look a lot better because we anchored on the 39. So anything lower than that is going to seem like a good deal. A lot of times in marketing, we think, well, I don't want to scare people away. Let's start with our lowest price. That'll, appeal to the most people. And then we can move some of them up the chain, but it's a lot harder to do. Now, if you don't happen to have a range of products and services, you can still make anchoring work for you. This is a mosquito repellent watch. And in the first paragraph, as they describe this watch, they say if you look at the features, it would be surprising to see a price tag of up to $150 for this. And you think, yeah, some pretty good features. Yeah, I could see that. Need to get to the second paragraph. And they say, but, from us, you can get it for $39.99. And you think, that's a great price. But if they hadn't used the $150 anchor up front, you might have gotten to the $39.99 and said, ooh, it's a little expensive for a mosquito repellent watch. But because they anchored you on the 150, that $39.99, that seems like a good deal. The other thing is humans aren't really good with numbers. We're not particularly good with numbers, and we're not really good at knowing what something should cost. The common things that we buy all the time, like a gallon of gas or loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, sure, we have a pretty good idea of what they should cost. But think about other products like life insurance, for example, or a lot of B2B products. Life insurance, some people never buy it. Other people buy it maybe once, possibly twice, right? So you don't really know what it's supposed to cost. So Fidelity says, look, it's cheaper than a cup of coffee a day. They put the price into context. They link it to something that is easy. Well, a cup of coffee a day, my gosh, I buy 2 or 3 cups of coffee a day. That's really nothing. This must be affordable. And, protecting my family's future is certainly more important than having a cup of coffee. So they put it into context. So what we want to do is we want to remember to lead with higher prices, and we want to, link to easy numbers. We want to anchor to it an easy number that people understand, that they can grasp. So we're talking about the fact that people rely on auditory cues, and it turns out that descriptions can trigger default decisions. How we describe something can make somebody really like that something or really not like that something. Behavioral scientists talk about framing, the idea of framing. And what they found is the way we describe our products or services, our companies, the way we describe the product or the service of the company not only conveys information, but it influences how people respond to that information. So researchers actually ran a study, and they gave people these bags of sweets, these bags of confections. And some of the bags were called fruit chews, and other bags said candy chews on them. And what the researchers found was when the bag said fruit chews, people ate more of them. Why? Well, fruit chew, right? It's probably good for us. It's healthy, right? Candy chew. Oh no, I shouldn't have that much candy. So how it was framed, and it was the exact same confection. They looked the same, they tasted the same, the ingredients were the same on both bags, but how it was framed made a difference in terms of how people responded to it. So how do we use that in our marketing? Well, here we've got an ad for the Ontario lottery. And a lot of times when we're thinking about buying a lottery ticket, what's the first thing on our mind? Am I going to win, right? But look at how they reframe the idea of buying a lottery ticket. They say, when you play, Ontario wins. Because, spoiler alert, chances are you're not going to win, right? That's the way these lotteries work. But they're saying, look, when you play, Ontario wins, because the proceeds from the tickets benefit everybody in the province. And they just make you think about buying the lottery ticket a little bit differently, right? It's not all about whether or not I'm going to win, but you know what? It makes sense to buy it. We're all going to be winners. Or here we have something from Buster Box, and they send a monthly box of dog toys to you for your dog. And at first blush, you might think, I am tripping over the dog toys. Buster does not need any more toys. But they frame it as a month-long dog party. And it's like, if you love your Buster, how can you deny Buster a month-long dog party, right? It's all about how you frame it. Well, here we have American Airlines, and they say the gold floor experience awaits. Now, interestingly, they're not saying the gold floor savings or the gold floor discount. No, they're talking about the gold floor experience. And what they're doing is they're tapping into some research, I believe, from Stanford University, that found that when you frame things in terms of time and experience, it's more potent than framing things in terms of money. When you talk about money, it focuses people on money. And as a result, they're more focused on what they're going to have to spend, and they're, more price sensitive. But when you focus people on the time they're going to spend with your product or service, they think about how they're going to experience it. And experiences usually involve emotions. And as we mentioned earlier, emotions are what drive the buying decisions. And suddenly you've made people a lot less price sensitive by focusing on experience and time as opposed to focusing on cost. So remember, get people to see things in a different way. That is precisely what framing allows you to do. So to recap, the third and final overarching behavioral science principle is we rely on auditory cues. If we give somebody the reason why, they're much more likely to do what we're asking them to do. Now, this is not, of course, a blanket thing. When Langer ran the experiment and she said, can I cut in front of you because I have 40 copies to make? Far fewer people said, oh, sure, jump in front of me. So we don't become robots, but we do, when we hear a reason why, we do have a tendency to respond in the positive. We are much more likely to comply and to say yes. Anchoring, that first piece of information becomes the reference point against which we evaluate everything else. And then the idea of framing, what we want to do is we want to get people to see things differently, not the way they used to, but the way we want them to. So our three overarching principles, it's not about how your customers and prospects think, but how they feel. Our choices are less rational and more reactional, and we rely on auditory cues. If we can keep these three overarching principles in mind when we're developing our content, when we're developing our marketing and sales materials, we'll go a long way towards getting those increased response rates. We'll be much better off in terms of getting people to pay attention to our message, notice it, understand what we're saying, respond to it, remember it. So I encourage you to keep these things in mind. If you want to know more about behavioral science, I encourage you to check out my book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, 288 pages, 17 chapters, and over 25 specific, actionable, practical, easy to apply behavioral science principles. And now I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me to chat with you guys today. If there's any questions, we'll kick things back over to Dennis, and I'd be happy to try to answer any that you might have. But I also want to leave you with the option of getting a free behavioral science cheat sheet. If you take a picture of that QR code, you can download it for free. It recaps a lot of what we talked about today, maybe adds in a point or two that we didn't get to, but it's a nice summary of what we covered. So take a shot of that if you're interested. And now we can turn to questions. But again, thank you so much. It's been great spending some time with you guys this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Nancy. So I do want to leave us some time for the book giveaway. So let's see. I think we have time for one question, and then everyone stay around because you might win one of 5 copies of Nancy's book. Does anyone have a question? Bob, go for it.
So Nancy, it's a 2-part question, but maybe a single answer. Is behavioral science derived from neuroscience? And more specifically, when you talked about the saber-tooth tiger earlier, we know that the prefrontal cortex is really slow relative to the amygdala, i.e. it's not surprising that feelings drive our initial reaction, which is basically described as all types of perception, so forth. So my question is that how do you go from somebody's feelings reacted to then become logical? In other words, you want to sell the features and benefit of your product or service, overcome the feeling portion. You gave some examples there, but how do you push forward?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer in providing both, because maybe the emotional thing is maybe what catches someone's attention right away or what really makes them decide, but they're going to point to those rational reasons. So we always want to have both. We want to put them there. Sometimes we actually want to focus people so much on the rational things that we want to introduce some friction, slow down that system 1 processing, slow down those, gut decisions, and really force them to start to consider and process and weigh and do the A/B list, right? So sometimes literally forcing some friction into things will slow things down. But what I like to do is I like to have that balance where I lead with something a little bit more emotional because that's what pulls people in, and then I provide the fodder or the support that's going to let people justify that kind of initial gut response that they had.
All right, so everyone stay on. I'm going to make a closing comment just for the recording, and then I'll stop the recording. So Nancy, thanks so much for your presentation. I think we have a lot of things to try out to use behavioral science in our marketing.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be here with you guys today. Thank you.